This is the Puck Poolies podcast with Matt Larkin and Stephen Ellis.
Hello, everybody. Happy New Year, and welcome back to Puck Poolies. It's Matt Larkin here with Stephen Ellis, our first show in the year 2024. Our little hiatus is over. We have lots to discuss today. Stephen, glad to be back with you, my friend. And before we get into all the news and the fantasy advice, I want to hear a little bit about what's your team been up to in the last month.
Well, it's nice to see you again, Matt, or hear you if you're just listening to the audio version. When it comes to my fantasy team, wow, I did not win anything. It was a terrible few weeks, but every time I lost was by like again, we're talking about in my 16 pool, we're looking at 500, 550 points being normal, and losing by like 2 or 3 is like the difference of, in some cases, like a shot or two the entire week.
Wow.
I lost every single one of my battles on like the last day, and I led every single one of them. Like every battle basically since the last time we did a show. So a month of losing, and I went from being second and like challenging for first to now fourth, trying to hold on to like not get past for fifth. It's a competitive group. It really stung a couple days ago when I think it was Friday night when Jack Hughes and Connor Bedard got hurt, and it's like, now I'm in trouble because they got hurt early in the game and I couldn't like swap them out with anybody, and that was just 2 lost performances. Between that, I also, when I was in Michigan on the Saturday, I put in Alexander Georgiev. Turns out he didn't start the game like originally thought, and Demko did and played well. But then Georgiev did actually get into the game because Colorado had a terrible start. So for me to lose these, it sucks. It stings because every single one of them I was leading and had a projected win pretty much locked up until the very end. So it sucks, but it happens.
Your team is lacking that killer instinct to close in these
Jack
close
Hughes,
games.
Jack Hughes, just like ever since his injury, has just not been what I needed him to be. And
Yeah.
JT Miller's been great. My goaltending, it feels like I'm waiting for Georgiev every other game to just let in 4 goals, and then you just hope for more. Like right now, I picked up Alex Lyon, and I might keep him. Like I'm almost feel more confident than in him right now because every time I put him in, it works. But yeah, I don't know.
Got to ride that wave. I'm in my league. I'm at a really weird crossroads. So the league is weird this year because we had a new GM come in who comes from like the professional hockey writer world, like me. And so obviously he's overqualified in terms of knowledge, and he inherits a team that had sold the year before. So he comes in, has all these first round picks, and just is able to build a super team from day one. And his team is so far ahead of every other team. It's like he's outscored the second highest scoring team by 100 plus points, and I'm talking about like player points. And it just feels like the league is not competitive. And my team blows up the bad teams. But when I go up against a few of these super teams, I can't measure up. And I'm like, what's the point here? I don't want to be that middling team that just kind of limps into the playoffs and loses in round 1. So I'm starting to wonder if I need to sell or at least hedge, get some first round picks back, and sort of think about next year. Because it just feels like a pointless exercise. Every time I go against a juggernaut, it's like, my squad just doesn't quite have the legs. So I don't know. I don't like living in the murky middle. I'm not Bill Guerin, I'm more of someone who likes to take risks and dominate or be bad. So we'll see what happens. But speaking of risks and big moves, Stephen, before we get into the regular meat of the show, we have to discuss the blockbuster trade. Philadelphia Flyers sending Cutter Gauthier to the Anaheim Ducks on Monday night for Jamie Drysdale and a second-round pick. I want your reaction, and of course, this is a fantasy podcast. So from a fantasy perspective, what is your take on this big trade?
So I wrote about it for Daily Faceoff. Philadelphia, you did not win this trade, and you know that. And Anaheim now has Cutter Gauthier, a guy who will probably play wing. My guess is he will play wing, but given he's been a center through college, that could also help for his eligibility. Assuming he goes pro this year at the end of the year and then next year. But you got Cutter Gauthier playing with, like, what are going to be, Trevor Zegras or Leo Carlson or Troy Terry. Like, the options are crazy there. And the Ducks didn't necessarily need Jamie Drysdale when they went out and got Pavel Mintyukov. They got Tristan Leno. They got Olin Zellweger, Jackson Lacombe. So they got these really good defensive options where that made him expendable. I do really like Drysdale for the Flyers, though. I think that that's a guy that who could be your number one power play quarterback. Was kind of looking like he could have hit 50 points if we were looking at just the natural progression of a young guy as a 20-year-old in the NHL, which would have been pretty nuts considering he lost that draft plus 1 year. He had to go straight to the NHL. He didn't get the proper development time in the OHL, so he's had a bit of a rocky road to this point. Add in all these injuries, but he showed a lot of promising signs. Yeah, if you see those stat cards, those player cards, you see a lot of a lot of analytics on Twitter. You'll point out that the defensive stats are not great, but from an offensive standpoint, I think he should be hitting 50 points, being that number one right-handed defenseman for the Flyers for a long time. There isn't really a ton of competition there, so I like the players for both teams, but Philadelphia, man, you guys lost this trade. I'm sorry, and you know it. But I wouldn't be disappointed about the guy you got. I think he's going to be a very important player for the Flyers moving forward.
That's right. And for Daily Faceoff readers, Stephen has a column breaking down Jamie Drysdale in detail on Daily Faceoff right now. Before I give my take, quick disclaimer, I apologize if I sound terrible. I'm just getting over a cold. My sinuses are all clogged, so I sound a little I sound a little bit like Professor Frank from The Simpsons. But my take on this trade, I actually, from a fantasy perspective, I love it for both players. For Cutter Gauthier, you're going to a team that has a lot more long-term potential in terms of what pieces they have in place in the next few years. Mason McTavish and Leo Carlson, Trevor Zegras, maybe, although maybe he's a trade candidate. We'll see. But either way, I think Gauthier is going to have more immediate access to similarly young and talented players if he turns pro after this season, which I suspect he will. And then for Jamie Drysdale, like you said, he's going to be the power play quarterback. The Flyers need someone on the right side because Ryan Ellis' career is pretty much over. And I think Jamie Drysdale can actually end up being a very similar player to Ryan Ellis, by the way. Undersized, really good puck mover, smart player. And I think that he's going to step in and probably get some of those minutes right away. Like, I think he's a pickup in fantasy right now. I think they're going to throw him to the Wolves and give him a shot. So I think he's no longer going to be blocked or competing with other, maybe even more talented offensive defenseman prospects like Olen Zellweger, Pavel Mintyukov, and goes on and on. He was going to have to fight those guys for years to come to get those high-end minutes in offensive situations. Now I think he's the guy in Philly. So I think it improves the fantasy value long-term of both players. Okay, Stephen, well, that's sort of our little intro, but now we can get into our sort of regular rhythm and let's talk fantasy pickups.
All right, let's start with a defenseman, shall we? Shallow pickup of the week, Thomas Harley.
Yes, Thomas Harley, Dallas Stars, available in 69% of leagues. The first way to think of it is it's an obvious direct replacement to Miro Heiskanen, who's injured. And we know Thomas Harley in terms of just a left shot defenseman who has natural offensive ability. He's an easy pick to slot right in. He's already in the last two games playing more than 24 minutes. He had 2 assists in his last game, 1 on the power play. He was already hot as well. It's not like he's just coming in and only succeeding because he's getting this opportunity. In his last 18 games, 6 goals, 14 points. That's a reminder that Thomas Harley is not some depth guy who's just going to get a temporary bump because his role changes. He's a talented player. He's a first-round pick. He was always expected to become this good, right? He's expected to become an important piece of the puzzle for Dallas. So not only is this a big opportunity, it doesn't mean that once Heiskanen's back that Harley's value is going to disappear either. So it's going to get a bump in the short term, but either way, he might be rosterable for the rest of the season.
Shout out to the NHL on Ice podcast. And when I was on there earlier this year, I said, pick up Thomas Harley. He's going to be a guy you really need to keep an eye on. At the time, he was playing really well. And it's good to see kind of that he's really having his breakout season this year. A guy that I am always scared to pick up because of his injury concerns, and that's Max Pacioretty, this week's medium pickup.
Yes, he's available in 70% of Yahoo leagues. And to be clear, the injury risk at his age, at this point of his career with multiple torn Achilles, it's never going away. He will be an injury risk for every single game he plays for the rest of his career. And if he does get hot, I do recommend selling him if he has a 5-point week. But 91 points in his previous 92 games spread across 3 very short seasons, but going into the season, we still know how effective he can be. And to me, it's someone that once he gets his rhythm, if he is healthy, he's going to help you. So he's right now on the second line, on the second power play unit. I do think he'll get a look on the top power play unit soon enough, just based on his skill set, his goal scoring ability. And I think he will be an asset pretty soon in the goals and shots categories. He might need a few more games. If you're adding him in a medium league, or especially in a shallow league, it's going to be for your bench for now. but hopefully he can find some magic, and I think he will be productive for a stretch, and that's when you should probably trade him.
I think people kind of forget, and me myself sometimes too, that he was one of the best goal scorers in the NHL for a while when he was in the Montreal Canadiens, a team that he didn't have a whole lot to work with for a long time there. So I think that, they're trying to think who his centers would have been. It was that's the Saka Koivu era. So I don't know. It's
Thomas Plekanec, or there's a few other that would have been
Scott
around that time.
Gomez. Like
Yeah,
he had to do a
dark
lot
days.
there. Yeah, he had to do a lot for that team. So I think it's easy to forget that when you haven't played as much. But if he's healthy, we'll see what happens. This one is a very interesting one, and that's a deep league pickup, Trent Frederick of the Boston Bruins, who I didn't realize his numbers have been this good this year.
Yeah, me neither. And admittedly, this is sort of the pickup I don't normally make. I don't love the reactive point chasing pick for a player who isn't necessarily going to sustain it. But eventually, when someone's doing it for so long, you have to sort of pay attention and say, okay, we got to just see where this goes. So Trent Frederick, usually known as an agitator, available in 94% of leagues. He's only playing on the third line, a little bit of power play too, but he's got 5 goals in his last 4 games. So he's hot right now, and it's possible this continues for a little while if he's really feeling it. So this could be a player, especially in a head-to-head league, who could help you win a week. I don't know if he's going to sustain it, again, because he's playing in the bottom 6. He's shooting 22% in terms of his efficiency. That's not sustainable. So the lease has to be very short. It's one of those, you pick him up, if he goes pointless for 2 games, you drop him. But maybe he keeps this going, and if he continues to play well enough, he might get promoted to a second line role or maybe some power play one time. So it's a wait and see. I wouldn't pick him up in anything other than a big, deep league for now.
Okay, I like that one. WTF pickup, a goaltender, Joey Daccord.
Joey Daccord, or as I always love to call him in my mind, because I had a French Canadian grandmother, I call him Joseph Okay, because Daccord means okay in French.
Yes, it is.
We know, of course, he was a revelation for Coachella Valley last year, going all the way to the Calder Cup final. Available in 32% of leagues right now, which is crazy. He is on a run. His last 9 games, 7-0-2, 958 save percentage, 1 shutout. He killed me in my head-to-head matchup. I was against him last week, and I got pounded because of Joey Daccord. And to me, he's looking like he's this year's Aiden Hill. This is a guy who was showing signs of it going into the season. I know Mike McKenna, our buddy, the former NHLer, was really high on Joey Daccord even after last season. And he's the guy in Seattle. He's taken the job in terms of the lion's share of starts from Philip Grubauer. He's helped turn Seattle back into a team with a shot at a playoff spot after a really slow start. And I think you just have to ride this. And especially with goalies, it's not like the Trent Frederick situation where it's like, oh, you're going to drop him in a couple games. Goalies, you can pick them up and maybe they become stars for the entire season. Look at Stuart Skinner last year. Look at Logan Thompson the year before. It goes on and on and on. So to me, you have to take Joey Daccord very seriously, at him. And this is someone who could end up being a league winner. And I think he's on a lot of teams that are really surging up their standings right now.
Yeah, just kind of watching him just play. Like last year, he played 5 games total. Like he played nothing last year. No, my bad. Sorry, played 5 games in the NHL, but he was injured a lot, missed some time, had to deal with some of that stuff, but looks pretty good. This year, it's been obviously great numbers this year. I'm not sure if I'm a believer, but just watching what we saw from him in Coachella Valley showed that something's there. So, what's this week's special segment?
Okay. The special of the week, it belongs to you, Steven. It's World Junior discussion. And I want to know which players. So obviously you saw every single game. You were up at all hours of the day. And you had, I think, as good of a read on the tournament as anybody out there. So I want you to break down a few players who you believe saw changes for better or worse in their keeper league value based on that performance on the big stage against elite competition at the World Juniors.
All right, so I love the World Juniors. I think you can make that very clear here. But I'm going to start here by talking about Frankie Nazar of the United States, a Chicago Blackhawks prospect, someone who, watching him play at the World Junior Summer Showcase in person, a guy who had just played only like 13 games a year before that due to injuries, had to really bounce back, and I thought he looks great. So for him, it was just kind of showing how he could prove he could take his game to another level here. We knew what Cutter Gauthier could do. Obviously, that was a fun backstory. But with Nazar, just seeing what he could do as which started as a third line center, became the second line center, and his line started to get more opportunities. But his work with Gavin Brindley out there was nuts, and probably throw Gavin Brindley on here too. But I think the way that he was able to just continuously find his line mates, no matter where they were on the ice, no matter where it was power plays, shorthand, no matter what, he seemed to just be one of the best playmakers in this entire tournament. I'm surprised he didn't get more love on the All Star teams. He had a couple of quiet games near the end, which probably didn't help. But I think just the early stages of that tournament, I would say that Nazar was more important than Cutter Gauthier, who did earn MVP love. So there's that. Kind of sticking with the Americans, I'm going to go Isaac Howard, a Tampa Bay Lightning prospect, who ended up tying for the league or tournament lead in goals scored, which if you kind of followed Isaac Howard's progress, when he was an NHL draft prospect, he was one of the best goal scorers that the US U18 team had. He was just putting up great numbers. And it was like, okay, there's some other deficiencies in his game. Not a great skater, not great defensively, but he can make up for it just in how many goals he could put in the net. And then last year, he had a very difficult college season. Ended up getting a transfer to Michigan State University. This year has become one of the highest moving prospects for me, for sure. Tampa Bay doesn't have a whole lot of good prospects to work with, but Isaac Howard has kind of just established himself as someone you really got to keep an eye on. The guy who did end up winning the MVP and tied Isaac Howard in goals was Jonathan Lekkerimäki. And for me, watching him, he had to be important for the Swedish team. He played in the 2 previous World Juniors, didn't look very good. I was talking with Ryan Kennedy, who was on our show last year, and talking about he was kind of the guy where like he needs to show up or else Sweden's doomed, because we know he could put up a lot of points. We saw that at points last year in the Allsvenskan in the playoffs specifically, and then this year in the SHL, he's been one of the better European-based prospects across the NHL. And to see him go out there and score 7 goals, I think 5 of them were power play goals, but he just like no one could beat him on the power play. It just seemed like anytime he had a chance, he went in. So generating a lot of shots, getting a lot of opportunities. There's a reason that people are excited about Jonathan Lekkerimäki. My fourth one I'll go into, sticking with Sweden, is Theo Lindstein on the St. Louis Blues. Didn't even make the team originally. Only got up because of kind of a funny coincidence. Frankie Nazar hurt one of the guys on the Swedish defense, and Theo Lindstein got called up. And it was like, okay, let's see. Maybe he's a 7th defenseman. Maybe he's playing limited minutes. I picked him on the All-Star team. He was that good. And he was, I'd say, better than Axel Sandin-Pellikka. I'd say he was probably Sweden's most important player. I know Lekkerimäki ended up getting the MVP, but Lindstein had such a great two-way impact. Probably the best defensive hockey I've seen from him. I've seen that where he would just kind of fall into the young defenseman offensive thing where he tries to do a little bit too much on the offensive side and would trail or struggle in his own zone. But that wasn't the case in this tournament. I just thought he was rock solid across the board. He had Tom Wielander, the Canucks prospect, as a defensive pairing, and they could both come back. So that's going to be very, very scary. And I want to finish this segment off talking about one guy who I was not a fan of, and that is Michael Rabel, the Czech goalie, Arizona Coyotes prospect. And I wrote about him after the U18s, and he played and said, this goalie's got a ton of skill. He's got the size. He's like, I think he's 6'6". Very good pedigree. Had to do a lot of heavy lifting for the Czechs. His numbers look good, but had a tendency to just fall apart when the games mattered. And we saw that. We started the U18s in the game against the Americans, where it looked like they were going to cause an upset against them. We saw it at the Hlinka Gretzky, where he was getting beat down low, blocker side, nonstop. In this tournament, he was getting beat glove side nonstop. And they lost that first game against the Slovaks, and that was where he got exposed. He did not look good. He played his best game against Canada to get them into the medal round, and then he fell apart. Sweden, he just kept getting beat on the glove side, and he got pulled, I think it was like 6 or 7 minutes into that bronze medal game. So when the Czechs ended up coming back, he wasn't the goalie in net for that. But I'd say very, disappointing tournament from a guy. He'll be back next year, but I think enough scouts have pointed out that he's had too many difficult games in important international situations. Like, these are just short tournaments, and the Czechs weren't necessarily known for having like rock solid defense. But the fact that it just seemed like anytime his team would get momentum, and then he would allow a soft goal below the glove or right down low by his pad on the right side, I think that's a little concerning. So those are the guys that kind of caught my eye, I'd say, the most. Obviously, Gauthier played very well, guys like that. But these are the guys that I wrote down as the ones that I think needed to talk about here.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's a really good rundown, especially Frankie Nazar, because of course you start wondering when he's going to fit together with Connor Bedard in the long term as part of the core for the Chicago Blackhawks. And I also learned he's someone whose name I never say aloud. I never know whether to call him Nazar or Nazar. I guess I now know. And to me, Isaac Howard's intriguing because the Tampa Bay Lightning, they depend so much on players with entry level cap hits to keep them going, to keep them competitive. And especially if they end up moving Steven Stamkos this year, we never know what's going to happen. If that does go down, to replace his production, they're going to need to promote a youngster and start building the next wave. And he's going to be a very important piece for them. I think we skipped a section,
Yeah.
Steven.
My apologies on that. I realize that.
You're excited. You want to talk World Juniors? I get it, man. But let's do our tip of the week now. And I call it fertile trading season. Okay, so we're roughly at the halfway point of the NHL season, and that means in Roto, you're at the halfway point. In a head-to-head league, you're past the halfway point because the last few weeks of the regular season will be your playoffs. And you're in this sort of perfect moment where every team is still probably in the hunt in a redraft league, but the hour is also getting late. So to me, this is the juncture at which even the quieter GMs in the league might be willing to deal. And I think that means it's time to get aggressive right now. Maybe even more so the trade deadline, because if you're in a redraft league where there's nothing to play for next year, by the trade deadline, there might be teams that are out of it and saying, why am I making this trade? Like, I'm not going to upset the competitive balance. We're still early enough that even the bad teams might still have a shot. So I think this is the time to get really aggressive and start trying to make moves. I think this is a more important time than your fantasy trade deadline, especially in a redraft. Maybe in a keeper league, the trade deadline is probably most important, fair enough. But in redraft, which is a more common league configuration, this is the moment because everyone's going to be engaged, especially because the fantasy football season just ended. I noticed in my own league, the activity always picks up in the weeks after fantasy football ends. And another thing that's important is right now the sample sizes are big enough that there might be some buy lows out there, and they have GMs who are finally ready to give up because, hey, it's been half a season. I can't wait forever. For a guy, let's say like Tim Stützle, who's been a little bit of an underachiever, you can go after a player like that, and you might be able to convince the GM to part with him because you might not have been able to do that when it's only 20 games into the season. So there are just so many reasons why now is when you should start getting aggressive and really start engaging other teams to make a move in your league.
All right. I like that. All right. Well, so we did the World Junior segment, so I apologize on that. Matt puts together a great list of topics, and I completely ignored the one part. But it's back to you talking again, this time about the best bet.
Yes, the best bet of the week. I surprised myself with this one. So
yes,
at Patano, at Patano.ca, they have some fun odds on picking in the futures the nationality of the winning team. I'm not saying the players, I'm saying what country the winning team comes from. And right now you can get plus money, plus 230 on Canadian Stanley Cup winner. And if you look at the Canadian teams right now, you have 4 teams that are really in it right now. You have the Winnipeg Jets atop the standings. You have the Edmonton Oilers, hottest team in the league. The Vancouver Canucks just dismantled the New York Rangers. They look like a real contender. And then you have the Leafs that are still in the mix. Even if they're maybe a little bit of a paper tiger, they're still high enough in the standings. They're right there. So that's 4 teams that I think everyone would agree is in the hunt, that are in the hunt. And the fact that you combine them into one bet at plus money, plus 230, to me, that's some pretty intriguing value. I kind of like taking a swing. And, if, obviously you're not factoring in Calgary, Montreal, or Ottawa. They're out of it in terms of being actual threats to win the Stanley Cup. But you get 4 good chances, I think, in the field of 32 with that plus 230 bet. So I think it's a fun one to take.
See, no Canadian team has won the Stanley Cup in my lifetime. No Canadian team has won in the the HD TV era or like having a personal cell phone era. So I don't know if I love the idea of it, but you put up a good argument there. A lot of Canadian teams are legitimately in this one. I don't trust any of them, but I don't know. I guess maybe this is the year to kind of just fight through. If Edmonton in particular, it's like, just imagine what would happen if they A, had a proper goalie the whole time, and B, just didn't have that start they had.
Yeah,
I think everyone would be looking at them as like they're number one. So
And I agree. If it was minus money, I wouldn't be even considering the bet because there does seem to be a curse on the Canadian teams. I think it relates to the post salary cap world because you just have Canadian teams typically, as we saw with the Toronto Maple Leafs this week, they have to pay either overpay or top of market value for their players, and you don't have tax breaks in certain states like you do in the US. You don't have any reason why players are willing to take less money. It seems like they're always going to take more because if they're going to play in that pressure cooker market, they're going to want more money. So it makes it, I think, harder for Canadian teams to build winners. So it's not certainly not set in stone that it's going to happen. But I just like the fact that there are 4 really good teams out there that are Canadian. So why not roll the dice?
Sure. And Nylander now has 11.5 million. He can now get a 2-bedroom condo now in Toronto. So
Exactly.
it's a nice upgrade from probably the den he was renting out, given the prices. So are you ready for some questions?
I am.
All right. So this first one is now extra interesting now that the Cutter Gauthier trade has happened. But Nick Jansen asks, long term, Mason McTavish or Adam Fantilli?
Yeah, really fun question, especially because Mason McTavish really started the season strongly. I think it's all about where they are relative to age and draft year. So Mason McTavish is a great prospect, future number 1 center. I think he's definitely surpassed Trevor Zegras on sort of the long-term org chart, if you will. And I think it's going to be him and Leo Carlson will be sort of jockeying for the number 1 and number 2 on that team for years to come. Cutter Gauthier, I think, as well, but also can play the wing. Because he's got that power forward game. But either way, big step forward for Mason McTavish. Very impressed. But Adam Fantilli is 2 draft classes younger. He shoots the puck more. He gets more hits in a fantasy context as well. And he's already pretty close to McTavish's numbers. So to me, we're seeing Fantilli already catch up, even though he's only a few months into his NHL career. And if you look at the pedigree, Mason McTavish, very good prospect. Adam Fantilli, elite level prospect, who would have been the number 1 overall pick in multiple other drafts. I think he would have been in 2021. I think he would have been in 2022, maybe even in 2020. You can make a case over Alexis Lafreniere. Adam Fantilli is a very, very special prospect. He is in the running for the best college freshman of all time, at least until Macklin Celebrini maybe beats that this year, but based on what he did last year. And to me, he's very similar to Jack Eichel in the sense that he got overshadowed because he happened to be in a generational talent year, but is such a special player. So it's no knock on Mason McTavish. I just think Adam Fantilli's ceiling is like in 5 years, he could be a top 5 pick in fantasy. That's how good he has the potential to be. So I still lean Fantilli.
Like, we're talking about Fantilli, who his ice time has been kind of up and down this year, where there are points where he's playing 4th-line minutes, and you're wondering, like, okay, could he go to the juniors because, like, this makes no sense. But he's still playing at a 22 50-point pace, or 22-goal, 50-point pace here. So that's quite impressive for someone who I do, as good as Columbus's prospect pool is, I do think Anaheim is just going to have more offensive weapons, and that's going to probably hurt. It will both help and hurt Mason McTavish. Help him because he'll probably be playing with some pretty quality line mates no matter what. Hurt because his ice time is going to be hurt by other guys coming in and stealing those opportunities. But McTavish could play the power play, but Adam Fantilli might run the power play in Columbus. I think just the way that the competition looks for both teams, it's a bit more crowded in Anaheim than it is in Columbus. So for me, Fantilli has at all levels been a play driver. He's been a guy that who could drive the play, but also like he'll finish a play. He could do a bit of everything. He's not afraid to get physical, and I think he's going to get more comfortable with the physical side of things. I think people forget how punishing he would be at other levels in college or in USHL. Would just throw some big hits, would like to get involved in things. So a guy like that could add extra value there. So I'm going Fantilli, but I also like McTavish. I'm a big fan of McTavish. Obviously, that Canadian World Junior hero a couple of years ago, the way he made the save of the century, essentially. And it was crazy talking to some of Canada's World Junior players and asking what their favorite World Junior memory was. And the Mason McTavish thing was like, oh, that's one of my plays, like, growing up. Like, I remember watching. It's like, dude, that was like a year and a half ago. Like, that was the summer of 2022. That wasn't that long ago. But no one's saying no one's saying what's his face, Jordan Eberle anymore. But I get it. Like, We're talking about 4-year-olds and 3-year-olds at that time.
That's a weird one. Or Jonathan Taves in the shootout. It's weird to think about that.
Yeah. Like next year, we're gonna get some 07s playing in this tournament. Maybe for Canada, maybe for the United States that were not alive when that happened. So
that's crazy.
Easy to think that, but that's how age works, I guess. Quentin Keller asks, could Martin Jones actually be Toronto's answer in net? Do you see them grabbing someone else in case Woll doesn't end up being the answer post-injury?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't think Jones is the answer. I think it's one of those anybody can get hot for a stretch. And the Leafs have played some pretty bad teams lately too. So some of Martin Jones's wins have been against sort of pushover opponents in that Pacific Division. And I just think, we've seen a massive sample size from Martin Jones. He's a veteran. We've seen enough of him at this point to know he's not going to suddenly become a Vezina Trophy caliber goaltender, even though his numbers are really good right now. He is a pro's pro, and this is exactly why the Leafs brought him in. They knew that in the modern game, goalies get hurt more than ever, and he's a great number 3 to come in, and he can hold things down for a little stretch, which is exactly what he's doing right now. But I don't think I'm just not that worried about Joseph Woll's timeline. I don't think there's been any indication that this is a season-ending injury or that it's even going to keep him out for the stretch run or the playoffs, anything like that. I think he'll be back with more than enough time to get himself reestablished for the stretch run. So I think it's still going to be, whether it's Woll and Jones or if Samsonov figures things out in the minors, comes back and it's Woll Samsonov, we'll see. But I still think Woll's going to be the guy. If something changes with that timeline, if Woll has a setback, then sure, I think I could see Brad Treliving making a move to bring in more help in net. But I just don't see any scenario in which, Martin Jones is taking over down the stretch and is your starter. Unless if he goes on an insane run and wins 10 starts in a row, something crazy like that, fair. But I don't see that happening. I think he's sort of beating up on a lot of easy teams right now. And as we record this, he gets to play San Jose again, second time in a row. So he's kind of just feeling it right now against some bad teams. But it's been a nice run.
I really don't like what they're doing with Hildeby here. And a lot of people said he was the guy they should call up. And I'm like, no, because they're not going to play him. And they haven't. He hasn't played a game yet. He's been kind of sitting there. And that seems odd to me. Petruzzelli could have held that role and you continue to get those opportunities. Granted, the Marlies haven't played a ton of games recently, but still, I guess they're viewing the being there and being part of the practices and seeing the games up close is more important. But I don't know. It just seems like you want them to play, right? That one's odd to me. But
I agree. And I want to give a shout out to my British neighbor, David, who had never lived in Canada before. And he's learning about hockey through me. Whenever we talk over the fence and we're taking out our garbage, he's like, I wanted to try a Marlies game. Could you tell me where to sit? And I showed him where to sit. And he sent me pictures from the game, and he was like, that keeper, Hildeby, he seems really talented. I think he's great. What do you think, Matt? And I was like, oh, good eye, David. And I told him last week, I'm like, David, your guy, Hildeby, he's been called up. He's like, oh, it's brilliant. That's brilliant. But then Hildeby's not playing. So I'm sorry, David. You do have a good eye for talent.
Yeah, he's a good goalie that really kind of defied the odds. Drafted at 20 years old and really just kind of proved that. I don't know. I was shocked to see him become the guy he was because he didn't play a whole lot in his couple of those draft years, and he showed enough to get to prove to the Leafs he was ready to go, and he is where he is right now. Last question comes from Logan, and he asks, is Noah Dobson reaching a new level this season? Yes. How much can we depend on his production staying constant on a mediocre Islanders team?
Yeah, well, to me, the fact that he is doing this on a mediocre Islanders team is the most encouraging part. It's not like he's in a situation where he's surrounded by elite players and they're just sort of bouncing pucks off him and he's getting secondary assists. He's been the best player, the best skater on this Islanders team this season, and he's not depending on others. He reminds me a lot of early Dougie Hamilton. So you have a big guy, right-handed shot, and he shoots the puck a ton. He blocks a lot of shots, got that big body, playing huge minutes, doesn't necessarily need to be surrounded by superstars. I just see so much Dougie Hamilton there, and I think Dougie Hamilton's been a very reliable fantasy defenseman, and I think that Noah Dobson's going to be as well for years to come. So I'm a huge believer, and it's almost the reverse of what you're sort of wondering about, Logan. It's like, if the Islanders do get more help and become less mediocre, then what's the ceiling for Noah Dobson? If he's doing it now on this team that sort of is perpetually boring, although admittedly they're a bit more dynamic this year, I'm super encouraged. So I think great long-term ceiling. I'm a total believer in what he's doing. And again, high-end prospect first-round pick. I always hammer that point, but it's like when a guy is supposed to be good and is good, it's like, no, you don't treat that as a fluke. That's what he was supposed to be.
Noah Dobson's going to be in the All-Star game, right? He's going to be voted in.
Oh, he better be. That would be a shame if he's not.
It's kind of funny seeing, like, I know, again, it's kind of a tired topic at this point, but seeing all the guys who made it, and it's like, okay, if Bedard's not ready to go, who does Chicago send?
Oh, man.
Peter Barasic? Like,
I don't know. Oh, man. Is there anybody?
I got to find this out.
It's like, what? Philip Kurashev? I feel like they just send like Seth Jones would be safe.
Is he even? Yeah. Well, oh my God, Kurashev.
Oh, isn't Seth Jones hurt too?
Yeah, I was gonna say he's often hurt. Doesn't actually. Maybe he is healthy right now, but man, he's not even having a great season by any means either. Mm-hmm. It's like he's on pace for like 30 points.
Yeah, that's
okay. Yeah, he's been played since December 10th.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, it's grim. It's very grim. It's almost like Chicago should just sign Phil Kessel and then send him to the All-Star game. That'd be fun. Send him back to Toronto.
It's like you know what the crazy thing is, if you're looking at it, it's like if you looked at the start of the year, it's like, okay, well, if it's not Bedard, let's say he's hurt, it's gonna be Taylor Hall. Well, he's hurt for the season, or it's gonna be Corey Perry. Well, he's not there anymore. So.
Yeah, Nick Foligno's hurt now too. Seth Jones, like it goes on and on. What a disaster!
Oh, could they just decline? Like, I don't know. That seems odd to me. But all right, we're done for the questions here. It's time for the starting lineup, and we've had some really good ones, but this is one I'm very interested to hear your opinion on, which is naming your 6 headliners for a music festival.
Okay, so the important disclaimer here is that I'm pretty crappy when it comes to music takes. Like, I'm not cool in terms of pop culture. I'm very plugged into the movie television scene. That's sort of my primary hobby in life other than sports. So I really know what's going on there. But in terms of music, I'm not cool, especially with young kids. I'm very much listening to a lot of top 40 these days because that's what's on the radio. That's what they want to hear. So this is not going to be a cool list. And I don't want anyone to think that I think that I'm cool with this list. And these aren't necessarily even my favorite artists. What I'm going for is a vibe. And this show, I think you're going to walk out saying, wow, I can't believe, A, that I saw all these big artists, but also I love the emotional ride that it took me on. Okay, so that's what I'm going for. Since I know I can't be cool, I'm not going to be pretentious and name a bunch of indie bands. I'm going pretty mainstream, but for a reason. Okay, so I'm giving you this lineup in order. Okay, so it starts with Bruno Mars. Like, Bruno Mars, what he hasn't even released an album in years, but he's got that band. They got a lot of energy. They're going to do Uptown Funk. They're going to get the crowd on their feet. They're going to get the energy going. He's a very good showman. You've seen him at the Super Bowl halftime show. He's done multiple. They're going to start. Then that's going to transition into Beyonce because she's got some great variety in her catalog. Very melodic, amazing voice. Then we're going to switch tones. After that, we're going to go Dr. Dre, Eminem, Snoop. That's sort of like the rap era that I grew up in. Like, that's when I was like 15. And again, that's going to get the crowd back up. A lot of energy, more of a hip hop vibe. Then we're going to switch. We're going to switch tones. We're going to go rock and roll after that. For the Foo Fighters, who have a really energetic feel, that's going to be great. Then you're going to need a little break. You're going to calm it down with some Fleet Foxes, a little folky, because you can't just go high energy over and over and over. And then once everyone is feeling good, maybe you've had a few libations, you're more in the mood to sing, you're kind of tired at the end of the night, it's going to finish off with Taylor Swift because there's so many sing-along tracks in her catalog. So that is my show. It's really weird, but it's all about the emotional journey you're going on, Stephen. I'm not cool, and I don't pretend to be.
Where are you hosting Matt Larkin Fest?
It's going to be somewhere really big. So let's just go. How about like Wembley Stadium? Like, I want a big venue because again, it's going to cost a lot to book these artists. This is like a lot of big names here. So I'm spending a lot of money for this show.
How are you raising that money?
I don't know. I haven't thought that far ahead.
How many lotteries are you going to win? All right. Well, yeah. I like this topic. I like this one. I think we got to do this for me one day.
Yes, for sure. I'll keep that in my back pocket. And I'm sorry for subjecting you all to that last one. I know it's probably not the best lineup, but hey, I gave it my best shot. And that's it for the show this week. We're back on our regular schedule as we get to the stretch run of the fantasy season, the trade deadline in real life, a lot of important signposts on the NHL calendar, and we'll be with you every step of the way. Thank you for listening and watching.